listening to Tyrion
Okay,
was
we're
a
back.
huge step.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We're back online.
We're back.
We're back on live.
We're back. Don't quite know what happened there. I apologize.
Sorry you missed us, but I can assure the audience that what we said was both insightful and witty.
Nah, I just took my pants off.
You're talking about this though, and I think that the moment in the final episode that talks about what you're saying is when or a good moment at least was when they were laughing about capitalism, or I mean democracy, and
right,
and they just dismissed it so easy, and that was going into the final season. That was my hope. I was hoping that they would just destroy the throne and that they would vote and become a democracy, and I thought that would be a great ending.
Yeah,
but it was way more realistic that they laughed it off, but I like that they addressed it and that it was there, and I really liked that part.
Yeah, so they come out of it and they literally laugh in the face, and then they let Tyrion essentially, in my opinion, maneuver himself into ruling the realm, and the people who are in control maintain control, with a few minor exceptions that it will, it's not going to be. It's just minor tweaks. It's what did I see? Let me look at my notes here that I thought was kind of a person. I forget what article I was reading, but I just grabbed this real quick. Now, it was on Vox. Now, my personal preference, it was Vox's recap of Game of Thrones. He writes, now my personal preference was always Tyrion invents democracy as a way to wrap up this series, and he sort of did that, proposing that the lords and ladies of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms choose all future rulers. Still, the very idea of Bran ending up as king is a bit ridiculous, but maybe that's the point. Everyone chuckles at the very notion of a democracy that allows everybody in the Seven Kingdoms a vote when Sam Tarly proposes it. Maybe the Seven Kingdoms need to struggle along in monarchy for a while longer, and if they do, well, why not have an all-seeing demigod on the throne to flatly intone about tax policies and land usage, long live the king? But I thought that was a great point, in that we see that and we go, why wouldn't they choose democracy? But if you really think, I think as libertarians, we sort of look at the current state of our choices and how we make choices, and we go, well, isn't this all patently ridiculous? I think somebody from 1300 will go, well, it's way better ordered with a king. Why way better than this? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't have freedom, just like we don't have freedom to do what you want within certain exceptions. So I don't know. I think that, again, going back to the scene where Tyrion maneuvers himself into being the king. He comes in, he puts all the chairs in order, sits in the chair. They come in, they talk about what the brothels. They start arguing about brothels, and versus do we help people or do we build brothels? And they're talking about absurd nonsense.
Those are not mutually exclusive options.
Right. They're talking about absurd nonsense, and you just sort of go, as it pulled back, I just went, holy shit, this is brilliant. And I don't know if I said it earlier, but it was the moment for me when I realized it doesn't matter what choice Jon Snow made. The wheel will continue, meaning people will always think that they ought to rule over others and will stop at nothing to get to that place. And if you study anything about history or our history or the world's history, the more you study history, the more you start to see our own times and our own behaviors in people of the past, especially now that you have histories that are much less propagandistic and trying to push a certain narrative. Now it's more, this is who the real person was, this is what actually happened. You start to see that it really doesn't matter what you do, even if you're Jon Snow putting a knife in the heart of Daenerys, you're going to get the wheel. You're going to get people trying to rule over others, and all of these innocent people that are nuked are all, it doesn't matter. They're all going to be victims of the 5 people. Like, we all love the characters in Game of Thrones. We love those people. But if you're just a peasant in Game of Thrones time, those are their tormentors. Those are the people that are oppressing them. And their petty little differences and fights are the ones that cost them their lives over this throne. And you just see the absurdity of it all, and you start to kind of go, wow, this is brilliant, because they really illustrated a couple things very well in that the fall of Daenerys, the Barack Obama figure who ends up being, or we love this guy. Oh, what a disappointment. And he killed a lot of people with drones. Or you get just the fact that we're always going to kind of repeat the same history unless we start to make some changes about our own behaviors and choices. You look like you have something to say, Todd.
No, well, just I don't want to get too far into politics, but when we talk about democracy, one of the things I think that makes the U.S. an exception is our leaders have been hesitant to deploy our military domestically. When we try to export democracy to other countries, hey, that's part of the deal. If I get control of the military, then my clan, my family gets to be in power and gets certain rights, and I'm going to punish the people that trod on me before. And
Right.
I don't know exactly why, maybe an accident of history, but in the U.S. we see it as, oh, no, you really shouldn't deploy those troops. It's okay around the world, but around here, we're not necessarily going to listen to a president that says, hey, go arrest my political enemies.
I think one of the clearest examples of this was who's the guy that talked about brothels,
Braun,
the guy that says cock every episode. He said it best when he had the thing up against the head of the Lannisters. Do you think
it's a crossbow?
The
thing.
Crossbow. Thank you. He goes,
You've never seen a crossbow, have you?
all these great houses. It's some rough bastard like me,
A cutthroat, basically.
that started these houses, that was ruthless enough to put themselves in this position.
The cutthroat that took Castlery Rock, and
That's
And then
Yep.
all you grandsons of the cutthroats do all your cock sucking and ruin everything. And
Yep.
and I thought,
He learned it
damn,
from the
he's
Lannisters.
right. Where do you
Lauren
think
Lannister?
where do you think the Bushes got their money? Laundering Nazi gold. Where do you think Trump's money came from? Trump's grandfather ran a brothel in California or Alaska or somewhere. Wealth is built by the people who act like Donald Trump, unfortunately. And then the rest of us are all I'm just going to be nice. And it sucks. But I thought that was a very clear moment. You actually put together some examples.
Yes, 2 pages worth, and we're going to go over these in meticulous detail, one by one. Oh, I'm just kidding.
this is really cool.
But you kind of see, Power Illustrated kind of walk us through some of this, and I'll put this into the show notes if you kind of want this summary. And really what I wanted to talk about tonight was, how does political power corrupt both the people and hurt the innocent that they're trying to rule over? And you really did a great job. You can go and check out this list in the show notes. But just, to not have themselves told on, they push Bran out of a window. Daenerys is sold to Khal Drogo.
And at that point, Daenerys is an innocent, right? She's just
Right.
a young girl that her brother sees as a way to gain power, so he can sell her off in exchange for soldiers.
Right. King Robert orders assassins to go kill Daenerys, who's innocent at that point. Joffrey. I mean, Joffrey was just one big giant abuse of power. Theon kills 2 innocent children in place of Bran and Rickon Stark. The Red Wedding. Slavers of Meereen have crucified children as a message to Daenerys and her army as they approach. Wildlings attack the wall out of desperation, and they're repelled in Season 4. Obviously, Season 5...
The Red Wedding is another example of that same kind of cheering that you were doing for Daenerys the whole time she was slaughtering the slavers and, the evil horse riders. The Red Wedding is they killed all the people you loved, and it was brutal, and you cried, and it was terrible, and it was the worst thing you ever saw on television.
So
but then you cheered when Arya Stark went there and slaughtered another family.
Right.
But it was basically the exact same thing, But we cheered for that because of who it was.
Right, because they were on our side, they were on our team, but the other side...
And sometimes that's just not black and white like it, in reality. In the world we live in, that's why I like Game of Thrones, is a lot more complex like our world. It's not so black and white like Lord of the Rings or something,
And they kind of covered this in the books, where Tywin has a conversation with Tyrion about the Red Wedding, and Tyrion's like, why in the world would you do that? And Tywin says, well, we could have had a battle in the open field, and a bunch of our people would have died too. And so is doing this way any worse?
Mm-hmm.
And as a reader, my answer is, yeah, it's a ton worse, because at the time, the rules of hospitality said, if you're our invited guest, you're safe here, even if we're warring. Tywin, do you plan on being at war forever? Because it would be nice to not have war at some point, and then by doing this, that rule is gone. Now no one is going to feel safe ever again, or at least for not 100 years or generations or whatever.
Right.
So sure you can see the brutal logic, but that's not thinking very far ahead, in my opinion.
Yeah. So the Lannisters are the Americans, and you're the wife of an American soldier, a Lannister soldier, and your king or your ruler, their president just ended the war.
Right.
With a CIA operation, so no soldiers needed to be deployed. You're super happy.
Right.
Your husband's not going to be deployed, no risk of death. You're praising your government for that action, which is
to put a cap on what you're saying is that we don't see all life as equal, and we should.
yeah.
Right.
Well, I cheered for Arya when she killed all the Frey soldiers because she didn't kill like his daughters, but at the Red Wedding, Caitlyn, she gone. Robb Stark's wife and baby gone. Like
Right.
the women were on the table as well to kill, but she was I'm just going to kill the soldiers that helped facilitate the Red Wedding.
nobles.
Yeah.
Justice and honor, and the innocent are
Right.
let go. Yeah.
So if you're going to kill, just kill the bad guys? Question mark.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just indiscriminate killing. That's why you didn't have a problem with Daenerys using the dragons against the men on the planks of the walls, because they're fighting against her. They've made the choice.
Okay, go. Sorry.
They've allegedly made the choice or been conscripted into that position, which, and then when they all surrender, we're all mad because she's killing innocent people. The reason that you have so much tension when Grey Worm is killing surrendered soldiers is that they're not posing a threat. They're bending the knee. They've given up their position and said, "I no longer will fight against you." And they almost click into that innocent status, and that's why you feel that tug that this is unjust, that you're not supposed to do this. This is dishonorable.
The rules of war. Like, we
Right.
surrender. Cool, we won. Fight's over.
Right. Exactly. So that's, justice does make a difference. If you're talking about the death penalty, killing, there's a difference. I'm against the death penalty totally, but if it's Ted Bundy and it's pretty clear that he committed all these murders versus a guy who's had a bunch of questions and he might be innocent, like in our minds, there's always that that tug. Like it's just to kill someone who's committed a lot of murders. It's unjust to kill someone who hasn't.
The people of King's Landing are not without sin.
In what way?
In the way that they yelled for the beheading of Ned Stark and convinced Joffrey to do it. In the way that they threw shit at Cersei Lannister as she walked down the streets back to the castle.
Right.
The people of King's Landing, it's all about perspective. They're not innocent.
Yeah, but that's really a misdemeanor. I don't think you can call for capital punishment.
It depends
For
on who you are. If they threw
shit-throwing.
shit at you, you might think different.
I don't think so.
So
but
let me ask.
maybe.
So let's kind of. I found some questions on some. I wish I had actually saved the site. So I apologize if I'm ripping off your work, but I don't believe in IP, so suck it, bro. So these were some questions in a college course about the books, but I thought they were really kind of interesting questions, and it's questions about power. So. Where does power come from and what do people do with it? And here's the bottom line. In a Game of Thrones, power isn't anything close to absolute. Power is continually shifting and changing. Even when you've got it, there's always someone else who's ready to snatch it from you. So, maybe we could try defining power and where it comes from and skip what do people do with it. But in terms of political power, we tend to think of like Louis XIV, the Sun King, and absolute power, probably the most powerful monarch in the history of Europe. And he had absolute power, total control. If you watch the miniseries Versailles on Netflix, great, by the way, then you kind of see this displayed. But in something like that, or if you read about kings of old, like even an absolute monarch in Europe in 1650, or King Henry VIII, they still had rules. Like there were always people trying to take power from them. Their power was shifting or waning. King Charles, who basically ended up being dethroned in the First English Civil War, did some things that just kind of led the sands underneath him to fall out beneath him. So and we tend to think in America, I mean, we tend to think that the American government is just all powerful and nothing can change it. But it can lose legitimacy if we wanted to. I mean, it's really so in your opinions, where does power come from?
Are you talking historically or in the modern age?
Let's talk about right now, relevant to the listener.
All right, I'll go with delegation.
I'll go at the barrel of a gun.
I say that as common citizens, we've essentially delegated, like, you know what, we don't want to like really be protecting our property all the time. We're going to elect leaders to make all these rules, and that way I can, speaking for myself, I can go play video games when I'm done with work.
Right. Gault, you said at the barrel of a gun. What do you mean?
Because while he's playing video games, if he wants to light up a joint here in Indiana, if they smell it outside, they'll kick down his door and take him to jail.
Right.
That's because most of the citizens will not protest. I won't say that they agree, but they will not protest that rule.
So, Jess, you're not a political person necessarily, so I won't ask you to answer if you don't want to, but, like, have you thought about where political power comes from, what the nature of it, or is it just something that you don't really think much about?
I try not to because it usually makes me sad.
You delegated
and it's
it.
because, exactly, I delegated it then, because I feel like the media tries to tell me what to think depending on where I'm watching or looking, and social media always tells me what to think, and it just makes me frustrated because I would like to think for myself, which I will not do either because it just makes me sad. So ignorance is bliss, I guess. I'll plead that way. But I mean, in Game of Thrones, because I was so excited we started talking about power. Littlefinger's quote to Cersei, and he's getting all cocky. He's like, knowledge is power. And Cersei's like, take 2 steps forward to her soldiers. Kill Peter Baelish or whatever, and they start to kill him. She's like, no, don't. I changed my mind. Now take 2 steps back. And her whole point is, power is power, not knowledge. So you can know all the things, but it doesn't matter because if you're in charge, you're in charge, and you have all the power.
What was the power that she was exhibiting? That Cersei was exhibiting?
Well, the barrel of a knife.
Right.
A sword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the person who feels that they legitimately have the ability to kill you.
And the
legally.
person that won the throne won it at, the barrel of a WMD.
Which is the thinking behind.
That was her weapon of mass destruction, the dragon.
Which is the thinking behind the term taxation is theft, for instance. That if you don't comply, then men in costumes are going to come and arrest you and put you in jail.
Right.
I think this would actually be a good time. Let's play this for our good friend Jessica. You may not have heard this. Can somebody give her headphones? You may have heard Marshall Fritz explanation.
Were you playing in your office before?
No, I don't think so.
I hear a lot of Shapiro in there.
I try to not. I try not to. What's the term? Propagandize you too much. But this is a guy named Marshall. This is a guy named Marshall Fritz talking in the 80s. The Cato Institute actually saved this audio. And Marshall Fritz founded the Advocates for Self-Government, which are the quiz people. And probably he's on Mount Rushmore, like Ron Paul, Murray Rothbard, Hayek, and Marshall Fritz. And he's the one that nobody knows, but he's the guy who really empowered the grassroots in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s to get out there and work. And this is him.
Can you repeat who's on Mount Rushmore again for me?
George Washington.
Right.
Sorry.
Not my Mount Rushmore. But this is Marshall Fritz asking people to examine their principles.
If someone were to come into your house, he's wearing a ski mask, he's carrying a shotgun, gets the drop on you, and he robs you of a bunch of your stuff. In your opinion, is there something wrong with that? Yeah. Yeah, sure, he says. Yeah, that's an easy one. How many of us would agree with John? That's obvious. He's saying, yeah, okay, good. Edgel, 2 people come into your home. Again, they're wearing the ski mask, they get the drop on you and all of that sort of stuff. They're cleaning out some of your stuff. You've got this great big built-in television set, and there's this argument that ensues, do they have enough time to get the TV set out of there? And you bring up that your brother-in-law, a highway patrolman, is due over any minute right, to watch the game. It might be best that there isn't time. And they sort of decide to vote on it. And it turns out the vote is 2-1, and they take the TV set. Edgel, does the process of taking your stuff become morally okay if you're allowed to vote on it? If they employ democratic principles and allow you to vote? No. How many of us think that if you get to vote on it, it's okay if people take your stuff? Only if you have a big family. Only if you have a big family. Martha, 3 of them come into Your house, this time they're not even wearing, they're very brazen now, they're not wearing ski masks, they're dressed in suits and all that sort of thing. You can see that they're carrying guns. And they prepared a list of things that they want you to give them, including your Mercedes. But one of them comments, he says, you know, Martha, young, delightful people like you should be in an exercise program. And while we are going to take your Mercedes, we're going to give you this nice Schwinn. And we encourage you to ride to work and ride to play and whatever. So they leave and all. Is it okay if someone takes your Mercedes as long as you get something, some return on your investment? You got the Schwinn out of it. Is it okay now? Not a good return, but does the morality of their taking your car change because they left you something behind? You got something good out of it. You got the Schwinn. Did the morality of the theft change because you got something? No. How many of us agree with Martha that the morality did not change? Okay, good. Bill, there you are. Hi. 4 of them come into your shop. Same thing with the Mercedes and the list and all this kind of stuff. But they do one more thing. Bill, they're going to not only give you a Schwinn, but they're going to give a Schwinn to a poor person down in Paraguay who needs a Schwinn in order for her to get to work and all and support her family. Let's say a couple of things here. One, you have not only a generic belief in value in helping disadvantaged people, but you have a very specific burden on your heart for the people of Paraguay. You lived down there as a kid. Your mom was the ambassador. You went back in the Peace Corps, and you've got this great sense for the people of Paraguay. Bill, is it morally okay for someone to take your Mercedes if they do something that you consider good with some of the proceeds?
Not morally okay.
That does not become morally okay, in your opinion. How many of us agree with Bill that even though they're doing something sort of nice that we approve of, it doesn't become the morality of it doesn't change? All right. Let's see, what are we up to? 4. Chris, what if we had 14 in the group? Would it be okay then?
I don't think so.
No? Richard, 40? Philip, 400? Linda, 4,000? 4 million, Phyllis? 104 million? Hey, watch it, guys. You're wrecking the carpet. I think libertarianism is the basic principles that your mom and dad, in all likelihood, taught you. They're the principles that my mom and dad taught me. Morality does not come from what the group decides. How many of us tell our teenage children, well, you just find out what everybody else is doing and then you do that? Oh, no! That's not the way we decide morality.
So that is Marshall Fritz talking about the morality of voting and taxation and government and power. What are your impressions of that, Jess?
It's a wow, I can hear myself. That was weird. It's just a different way to put it. I like putting it into simple words. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
For the peons like me, that's like, I just pay taxes.
Right.
You do what you want to do. Yeah, normie.
Friggin' normie.
But what about okay, so in Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Is that like the counter to that, where we pay taxes to take care of everyone and
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So, if you want to get that clip, you can go to wearelibertarians.com/libertarianism, and then it's on Big Idea 1. You can grab that there. But we have a kind of a basic walkthrough of libertarianism at wearelibertarians.com. Look for new to libertarianism in the top bar. Sorry, I had to plug, Jess. You're in radio. You understand. But I don't think that the intention a lot of times is let's design a government that centrally plans to solve the needs of the many. What you get is a small group of people trying to maintain power. You could look at the founding of America, and you can look at it 2 ways, and both of which are not inaccurate. First way is that the American founding was an enormous leap in human history, where a group of men decided to decentralize power, spread it out amongst the states, and diffuse the power, allow Alabama to have the most restrictions on abortion, while New York allows you to have the least restrictions on abortion, and the two can both cooperate peacefully. You can look at it as a massive step forward in human history where they said there's no longer going to be a king. Every man is the king of themselves. Or you could look at it as a group of white slave owners, which is not totally go talk to John Adams about slavery. A group of essentially the lords of America, as you saw in the Game of Thrones scene where Tyrion's convincing them to select Bran, making sure that their personal economic interests are secured. Both of those are true. They set up in 1797, 95, when the Constitution was ratified, they recreated the articles into the Constitution and built a system that was freer than any other government in human history, but at the same time did it in a way that protected themselves and their interests, just like the Lords of the Seven Kingdoms.
Six.
It's gray, just like reality.
And so, right.
Not so black and white.
And then over time, you get to a point 200 and nearly 50 years later where we're at now, where you have a more centralized government. You have people along the ways, people like, there's something called the social gospel that was very popular after the Civil War. There was a very real problem after the Civil War into the early 1900s, which is part of why prohibition was supported. I mean, if you think about it, you know how hard it is to pass an amendment to the Constitution. They were able to amend the Constitution to pass prohibition, which means there had to be massive support in the states and in the United States to pass a prohibition on alcohol. It wasn't just the stroke of a pen like executive power now. I mean, it was a constitutional amendment. But it had the backing because during the Civil War, you had men for the first time traveling outside of their local areas. They were drinking a lot. They were carousing a lot. And then they came home, and the carousing never stopped. The drinking never stopped. The abuse of their wives from the PTSD and other reasons never stopped. And so you had societies that were kind of out of control. And so the idea of the social gospel popped up, and it was the idea that individual salvation isn't as important as purifying the nation and saving the soul of a nation. And so we must prohibit dancing. And they literally used to monitor everyone's postal mail. Like Anthony Comstock got put in charge of the mail, and like you couldn't get certain magazines delivered because the United States Postal Service would no longer deliver that mail. You had prohibition come out of that. You had a lot of ideas, this idea that the federal government now should be in charge of being the moral arbiter of what is good and what is not in the United States. That's completely counter to the founding, but came out of very noble intentions.
Right.
We want less men to beat their wives. We want less men to be drunks. We want more productive men to be part of society. What's the best way to do it? Let's pass a law at the federal level. And then that thinking, in the Republican Party through T.R. Roosevelt and through the Democratic Party with Woodrow Wilson introduces these strains that eventually lead us to the modern parties that we have now, where everybody's arguing over, like there are people right now protesting abortion in Indiana over Alabama laws. You don't have dick to do in Indiana with what goes on in Alabama. Like, you're stupid. You're just kind of like, you don't understand how the actual republic works. You're just mad because you want your rights to be protected. So if you're mad in Indiana about something that's going on in Alabama when a politician at the federal level comes along and says, I'm going to make sure that Alabama's laws don't happen, you're going to vote for that person. And they're trying to gain their political power by saying, I will get the federal government to do stuff. And as a non-political person, what race do you pay attention to? Maybe president?
Yeah. Even that gets kind of depressing. Governor.
Right.
Mayor. That's about it.
Right.
Sorry, everybody else.
We're not judging you because most of the people that listen don't even vote. But yeah, like most people like Pete Buttigieg or Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump want to run for president because it gives them the biggest chunk of power they possibly can have. But we never stop to really kind of ask ourselves, is any of this power theirs to have in the first place? Which I thought was kind of a good question. The last questions from this thing was, does a Game of Thrones say anything about... Now, before I ask this question, did I even come close to answering kind of your question?
Yeah, sure.
What was your question?
I forgot now.
Yeah, right.
Basically, it's like if I make more money I don't know. What are your thoughts on what he said?
I think I said a lot.
Like I should start asking you like what I asked my teacher in school.
That
Just turn it on him.
was a very powerful clip that when I heard it, I went, oh, I'd been a libertarian since Todd hired me in 2008. I'd been a libertarian since 2007. I heard that in 2013, and I went, oh, I never thought of power in terms of morality. I never thought of the United States government or my local government in terms of, is their power moral or legitimate? And would I conduct my personal behavior in that way? No, like I wouldn't steal from you. It's against my personal morality. So why is it okay that I elect other people and outsource that ability to steal to someone else? So it was a very instructive clip for me, to be honest. But I think it's so far removed from how people like yourself, Jessica, think about government. You just kind of think like, oh, I have these two choices. Who should I choose? But you never kind of get to the place where you go, should I choose? Do I have to? Like, why do they have the ability? Why are there only two choices? We never kind of step out of that binary choice and kind of start examining it from a larger perspective.
If you lived in Australia, you have to choose.
Right. Yeah, that's mandatory voting.
We're just like the lords that laugh at democracy when it was really the best choice.
Right. Was it? Because Hans Hermann Hoppe saw that clip and he went, I agree, so to speak.
I know you wanted to get something else, but I'm going to interject here. One of the things that as I watched, the scene with Daenerys in the final season, it reminded me of, or I guess I drew a parallel in history of, you've made as smart people, you've made this decision of, I'm going to support this person. I think this is the best person. And then once it becomes apparent that you've elevated this person has a ton of power, how do we change our minds? How do we get rid of her? I kind of thought like, this is probably how Stalin got to power.
Yeah.
We decided that Stalin was the right guy. This is the person that can change things in the right direction. Then he actually gets into power, and you're like, uh-oh, what have we done? And what are our options now? Gosh, we don't really have any options.
It's also the incentives that are set up in the system, too. Like, you have a system like a monarchy, like the Game of Thrones. There's no other place but... There's no... Like, Jon Snow would have been corrupted by that system. Like, I heard Glenn Beck talk about one time when Bush was president. This is how long ago this was. Obama had been in office like maybe a year, and Obama had just made some decision that was very Bush-like in terms of foreign policy. And he told a story about how he was visiting Bush in the Oval Office one day. The TV was on, and Obama was giving an anti-war speech, and Bush just kind of like stopped, looked at the TV, then looked at Beck, and he goes, he's going to totally change his mind when he gets in this office. He goes, when you sit in this seat, everything changes. When you're out there on the stump speech, everything's different than when you actually sit in the seat. And so when you see somebody who is diametrically opposed to George W. Bush coming into office and continuing his policies, and then Trump diametrically opposed to Obama getting into office and continuing Bush and Obama's policies, like you see the wheel continuing on the federal level, you have to go, you couldn't pick three more different men than Bush, Obama, and Trump, and yet there's a continuation of the government. Maybe the system itself is set up, and it doesn't matter who we put in the seat. It's the choices that have been made for them over the last 250 years or 50 years. You look at Trump, and Trump's trying not to do certain things, and his advisors just hide the pieces of paper from him, or they don't follow through on his orders, or Trump seems fairly non-interventionist compared to Bush and Obama. And yet here we are talking about Iran and going to war with Iran, and it's the same people that are in the swamp that he's kind of surrounded himself heading into his second term, which I think he'll probably be reelected. And you just sort of go, how did all the Bush people get back in charge? Trump is the farthest thing from a Bush person, and yet all of Bush's advisors are in charge. You know, it's not like he has better ideas because, like Daenerys, what do you do when the wheel's broken? What do you do when you get to the White House? I need to staff thousands of offices. And so what does Trump do? He goes to Republican think tanks in Washington, D.C., and hires the same people that went to work for those think tanks when they left the Bush administration. And so the millions of choices a day that are made in the alphabet soup of the EPA, the FCC, the FDA, are made by people who have sort of a governing philosophy that just is a continuation of the wheel.
And those positions attract a certain type of person. I don't
Right.
really want to run other people's lives. So if you ask me, hey, would you do this? I'm like, I'll do it for one term maybe because you're my friend. But then if somebody else comes in and asks, nah, I'm done with that. But the people that, John Bolton and the career bureaucrats, like, they want to make those decisions. They want to interfere in other people's lives because they know better, Chris.
Well, but a lot of, and like I have been spending a lot of time at the local establishment lately, and with the swamp, we talk to people. I talked to Rob Cortell in our series from the Swamp, or the Swamp Explained, and you don't get, you find that those people don't see it the way that we see it. They don't see themselves as wielding power, and if they do, they're wielding it for the right reasons. They're doing it for the responsible thing. We just know better than you because we're better connected, have better information, and so we're doing what's right on your behalf. It's public service. That could be completely true. But then the other two things can be true at once. The other truth is that I don't want you making those decisions for me. I don't need you to make those decisions for me. Quit your job and don't replace you.
I don't want a new soccer stadium funded with taxpayer dollars in Indianapolis.
Right. But
Oh, me either.
But you don't understand. The downtown core with 41,000 hospitality jobs depend on furthering the sports strategy of building sports stadiums. And if we don't build a soccer stadium, then we give up on that strategy that gave us a vibrant downtown that's the envy of the world, Todd. And there's some truth to that. There's absolutely truth to the fact that Indianapolis investing city dollars.
When the Pacers were playing in Market Square when I was growing up, you did not want to be in downtown after night.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of truth to the fact that using taxpayer money to build these sports arenas downtown and build a mall downtown led to Indianapolis having a downtown that is much different than Philadelphia, Columbus,
Atlanta.
Cincinnati, Atlanta. It is a great downtown. But the choice now, if you were mayor, the choice was made for you in 1969 when Lugar was mayor, or 1972 when Hudnut was mayor. You now continue that policy or you don't, because you now have 41,000 people that are dependent on that environment.
Question, because I can talk soccer a little bit, not
All right.
politics. How come they want their own stadium, like their own soccer stadium, right? Because in Atlanta, they just got a major league soccer team, the Atlanta United, and they are sharing the Mercedes-Benz, stadium with the Falcons, and it works out pretty well because whatever.
Yeah,
How come
actually,
we can't just do that?
I have a good friend that got season tickets to the soccer
I've been to a couple
team,
games.
and
They're
he really
fantastic.
liked it. Yeah. So I think that the people on the ground floor of MLS, they didn't have to have a soccer-specific stadium, but what MLS has said is from now on, anyone who gets an expansion franchise, like Cincinnati is building a new one, for example, has to have a dedicated soccer-only stadium to be approved into
See,
MLS.
I'm not informed. Thank you.
No, that's why you're here. You're
That's
here
why
to be
I'm here. I'm the.
you're
What
the
is it? What am I? The
the voice of the
normie?
listener. Yes.
Normie.
The normie.
You're here to be the voice of the listener
I'm
for
a
this episode.
muggle. Yeah.
Because what you have to understand, Jess, and I want to do more of this on episodes, is that there are more of our listeners like you trying to figure stuff out. And so if you're here going, I have a question, that's better for our audience than having a bunch of people like me going, Ree! Just talking over everyone's head.
I mean, I know Ron Paul. Nobody else you really mentioned. Sorry.
So the real answer, he gave the answer that they tell you publicly. He gave you the answer that you read in the Indianapolis Business Journal. Here's the answer.
Indeed.
They're playing in Lucas Oil Stadium. That's a great stadium. A lot of taxpayer money built that stadium. But the guy who owns the soccer team is a real estate developer. And if he can convince IPS to sell the old Broad Ripple High School in one of the most vibrant areas of downtown, it's called Broad Ripple. It's a college area. That land is so valuable. He can then build condos, a soccer stadium, retail shops, and he now owns the land rights to one of the most valuable pieces of property in all of Indianapolis. And so, like Jim Irsay became a billionaire with the stroke of the pen when Mitch Daniels and the city of Indianapolis signed the deal for Lucas Oil Stadium, the Colts owner became a billionaire that day with that stroke of the pen because he was backed by the taxpayers of Indiana.
But where are my tickets?
You don't matter.
I didn't get Colts tickets, though.
Right. And here's the difference, is that people are willing to make a risk on the Colts because Joe Sixpack, it's aspirational. I may one day get to go to Lucas Oil Stadium, so I don't mind if my tax dollars go to it because I want to go to a Colts game and I don't want them to leave.
But I don't want to watch no gosh darn soccer.
Thank you. But
That's pretty good.
he's still got the funding to build a soccer stadium, and it's because Ursal also is a major donor to a lot of Indiana politicians and lives in the neighborhood next to all of these politicians.
What?
Yeah.
Why is Bron on the small council?
Yeah,
And
that's
he
right. We
rubs somebody's
gotta-
back just like that.
Right.
We got to get back to Game of Thrones.
He's just like the soccer guy. He's like, nobody wants you here, but you're here anyway.
Right.
One other thing on my list before we leave corruption entirely that really spoke to me was, and both in the books and Stannis Baratheon is portrayed as an honorable man. He is completely corrupted by power to the point where he lets someone kill his own daughter.
Is that the guy who at the end stood up to try and make the argument that he was the king? Or is this the
No,
guy?
that's
No.
Sansa's uncle that
Yeah.
married the Walder Frey
That was
daughter.
Edmure
at the-
Tully.
It was his red wedding, technically.
Oh, okay.
He's the guy that got married at the Red Wedding.
Okay, I remember who that is. No, you're talking about the guy who was dating,
The Red Woman.
dating the red woman.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes, and let her turn him into a shade with
For
black
power.
magic for power.
to kill his other brother.
to kill his other brother for power, and eventually to sacrifice his own daughter.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that one of the major themes for it for me with political corruption is that political power dehumanizes you. I mean, when you get to a certain point, you were talking about how like locally maybe they start like, I'm doing this for good, I'm doing this to help people, but eventually it doesn't. You lose that, and that's what happened to like all of your favorite characters in the show is that they all got corrupted by that power and they lost their humanity. And Daenerys, even talking to Jon in that final episode, didn't see what she did. She still couldn't see
Zero
it, even with
awareness.
him like begging her in her face. She still couldn't see what she did, and it was like she had lost all of her humanity to me.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with Stannis. That's why I remembered that, is because Stannis did the same exact thing happen to him. That was almost parallel.
Yeah, they become so convinced that what they're doing is right that they lose sight that they're hurting people. Like the people who designed CPS thought that they were helping children, but the end result is that CPS just it makes people think that they did something by calling CPS, and children never get helped. Oh, I'm a doctor, I just called CPS. Well, they don't do anything. They don't protect kids. Anybody who's ever watched CPS and how they operate, I have so many female friends who they get investigated because their ex has been called, CPS has been called on their ex. They get them out to the house, but the ex has a lawyer, and so they don't go investigate him. And so the behavior from the man continues while the woman and her children suffer because the doctors and the teachers and everybody called CPS. We felt like we did something, and that's the end result of it. And so innocent people just get hurt all of the time. So
It's kind of depressing.
I know. Welcome to We Are Libertarians. So, are there any forms of power that the powerless have? Think about Arya, Sansa, Bran, and Rickon. Or children have less obvious power in this book, but do they hold any power over others? I mean, what power do the seemingly powerless in our society or in the story, what sort of threads of power do you see them having? I mean, in my mind, the trauma that the Stark girls go through, for instance, ends up making them have nerves of steel. You look at their mother and you go, wow, how did she become that way? Well, she became that way because she went through the same thing Sansa did. And so we tend to look at older people and go, how'd they get that strength? It's like, because they were weak and went through shit at one point. And to me, that is one example of how people gain power, is they rise above those circumstances and work through situations where they felt powerless.
So she was in an accident in outer space, and then she like got reborn.
Right.
No, is that not how Caitlin Stark? What?
Did I say her name wrong?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Real nerds will get the reference.
All right. Good. You laughed. Did you? Yeah. All right. So, any other thoughts about the powerless in this particular story or in our own society? What powers do they might possibly wield?
I mean, persuasion, right? I mean, kids are cute because when they're acting like assholes, you don't strangle them. Okay? I have 2 kids of my own. So, for example, Ned Stark, the only reason that he agrees to confess to treason is to save his daughter's lives. So his daughters in that way have a power over their father.
What about the little birds, the kids that are working for like Varys, the Master of Whispers?
Yeah.
Like they're learning from him because as a kid you're unsuspected,
Right.
but you can kind of gain power that way, work your way up the ranks eventually.
Seduction is another form of power. The way that seduction came about over time is that physically women couldn't compete with men in prehistory and then, until recent history, really. And so seduction was the power that women wielded to further their own interests. That's one way. That's one particular power.
That'd be Marjorie,
right?
in this case,
Yeah.
probably.
Magic.
Supernatural power.
Mm-hmm. Not in reality, but in the show, there is that power.
I believe
Children
in,
of the Forest.
I believe
Yeah.
in God.
They're not
so.
strong, but they have magic.
Bran, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some specific examples that are called out in the show.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that one power that isn't often seen as maybe social custom or social norms or even the law is a power that helps protect the innocent. You see in the case like mercy, for instance. Maybe there's some examples in Game of Thrones of mercy where it was shown and that, maybe somebody was about Tyrion. When Tyrion is alleged to have poisoned Joffrey and mercy is shown to him, that's one example of power that people can have over the innocent.
We're talking about individual power. I was just thinking of the church, institutional power.
Yeah.
Like how the High Sparrow rose from, barefoot in the streets to
Right.
having the queen and 2 queens locked up in a dungeon, basically.
They had like the most power until
Mhm.
Cersei basically blasted them.
And the opposite of that is money, right? The
Mhm.
Lannisters have power because there's gold under Casterly Rock.
So I guess we could say that we started out with the immorality of political power in a lot of ways, but there are forms of power that are moral, things like justice, things like mercy, that are wielded in are moral powers.
It kind of gets Jon Snow killed, right? Because he
Right.
wants to go against custom, invite the wildlings and the giants in, and no, you can't just kill the giant. He's eating vegetables and such. And the Night Watch, basically, the mutineers say, that isn't right. For the Night's Watch, we're going to kill you.
Hey, Todd, do you remember for 7 seasons we heard winter is coming, and then we got to stock food, and then winter came, and then nothing happened with winter?
They killed it. They ended the
Win-
long night.
but
Yeah.
winter still
going.
happens.
It still did
No.
trickle down because it started snowing in King's Landing.
Yeah,
the last
that was
episode.
nuclear winter, though.
Yeah, that's
But
just
in the
yeah.
books, he does infer that maybe when the long night ends, that the seasons might become a little more regular
Mm.
instead of
Who
months
doesn't
and
need to
years
be-
long.
Didn't you see the grass north of the wall when they're getting ready to enter the haunted
Yeah, there
forest?
was
at the end?
spring
That's
north of the
What
wall.
is it? The dreams of spring or
Yeah.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I did not. All right, let's give our final thoughts on the show, on all of this. Let's go around. Gault, you're an old veteran. Why don't you show the young kids how it's done?
Well, I kind of went into mine. It's all about. I think it was all about dehumanization. And one other point I'll make about it, like with Stannis that did it, and then you also had the opposite happen with Cersei. She had all that political power, and she wasn't a human for seasons. For many seasons, we didn't see any emotion from her.
She was her father. I mean,
And at the end, when she lost her political power, she became human again, and she cared about her baby and her brother, and you almost wanted, you didn't want to, but you almost felt something for her there. And that was I think it was pretty clear there that once she lost that power, she got her humanity back.
Yeah. All right, Jess Alsman, final thoughts on Game of Thrones or Power or anything that you'd like to say?
Overall, great series. I think the characters are very just detailed, and there's more to them than just on the surface, which is really cool to see the character arcs and how they develop and how they handle situations like either getting power or having to, find their own strength, whether it be Sansa or Arya or, I don't know, Jon, bless his heart in the end. Still want to see him on the throne, but whatever. He can go be wild north of the wall.
I guess.
So, I don't know. It's really cool. And I like how I'm on here and you guys are kind of putting real world stuff into it. I appreciate that. Not just me comparing Game of Thrones to Lord of the Rings.
It's a new way to think about it, isn't it?
Did you learn anything this episode?
I did.
What did you learn?
What do you think, Todd, of Game of
What do you
Thrones?
think, Todd?
Or Game of Thrones.
I like
of
that.
this
I'm going to
whole
start doing
episode.
that.
I want to reiterate something that Jess said, that I really enjoyed the series. I really enjoyed the first 3 books. But, so while I have some nitpicks, this was great entertainment, great television, great acting. So even though I said, some things, some nitpicks, I really thank HBO for putting all the money into it and all the entertainment. So final words here. I'm going to just mention this. Robbie Suave from Reason, he wrote several things on Game of Thrones this season, and he talked about in a podcast recently, both Jon and Tyrion rebuke this madness Daenerys is referring to. It's hard not to recognize a kind of libertarian principle in their condemnation. On the podcast, I referenced C.S. Lewis's famous quote about tyrants, and it's fitting here to reproduce the entire thing. Quote, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They may be more likely to go to heaven, yet at the same time likelier to make a hell of earth." And that's why Jon had to kill Daenerys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good.
Malice mentioned that quote. I would recommend Michael Malice's book, The New Right. If you've found this episode interesting, you'll find that book interesting as well. Were you done, by the way? I wanted to make sure that you got everything out. Okay. All right. Jessica's done.
I don't want to cut you off, Spangle.
No, it's okay.
Cut him off.
No.
That's what makes it great.
Cut him off.
When someone has, some kahunas to stand up to the dear leader.
Well, she made a joke
Oh,
about
no.
Todd, but I just want to make sure.
Get ready for 20 questions tomorrow in the office. Don't you dare put those headphones on. I'm like, so Spangle, tell me your thoughts on this with history and when did this happen?
I will
and
just.
then
I will just.
why
look
did
at
they
you.
do this?
I go, can we just do a follow-up episode? Just got a text. Those of you who listen religiously, like Todd, you texted me and said, I heard Miranda was going to be on this episode. And so if you want some backup in case she doesn't show up, then I'll be there. And I said, come on down. I knew Gault was going to show up. He's Mr. Reliable. I asked Jess on. And then Miranda just texted me at 9:18 p.m. when we started at 7. Oh my God, I just realized today was Tuesday. LOL. Did you GOT podcast without me?
Yes.
Yes, Miranda.
We
Sorry.
are finishing it as we speak. LOL. No worries. I should have reminded her. But she's...
Follow-up episode on Game of Thrones? Is that what we're doing?
Yes. One more hour. All right, guys. Thanks so much for being here. I would say my wrap-up is that I loved the series as a whole. I thought, as you can see from this episode, it was very illustrative of a lot of things that we see in our own lives that can help us kind of elevate from this story and kind of examine things from a different perspective and look at political power from a different way. It kind of helps maybe marry it to sort of what we see today. I think for us individually, when it talks, when we talk about what we can do, it really comes down to your individual choices. And what you see in Game of Thrones are a lot of individuals making a lot of choices. They have sometimes a binary choice between good and evil, or there's even in our own lives those moments of gray where I could lie and tell this little white lie and nobody's going to know the difference, but you start spinning out of control with that, or not all of us are Ned Stark and just full of honor all the time and always do the right thing, and not all of us are Daenerys Targaryen, lighting everyone and committing genocide. You know, a lot of us are the Clegane brothers, you know, the Hound, who do good and bad things, and I think he is, for me, the most human in the story, because the Hound wants to just do whatever he wants to do, and then get sucked along by duty, and get sucked along by doing the right thing. But then sometimes in doing the right thing, it's necessary to do the bad thing. And I think he just is kind of, he exemplified the push and pull that we constantly see in our daily lives. And by his constantly making the right choice, meaning the good choice, we have that power too. And he became a very powerful person in the story. And so I think you have to think about what choices you make on a daily basis, and how you interact with others, and how you vote, and how you express your values, and what you think. And that really is your power. Your power is to make those individual choices. And the millions, the billions of people that live on this planet, the more we can convince and persuade to make the right choices and to enact your morality through your vote, and stop just because you want to use the barrel of a gun and vote in a certain type of morality or a certain type of policy. It doesn't make your choice more moral. So just remember your own power, and remember that it comes in the form of daily choices. So that's what I would say. Yes, Jess?
Can I make one more normie comment?
Please.
I would like to see in politics, and this is really hard because it'll never happen, right? Find a leader that puts his or her interest aside, like Tormund did and Jon Snow. So Tormund with the wildlings and Jon Snow with the Night's Watch. Everything you've ever heard or ever thought, let's put that all aside.
The big woman.
The best
is
interest is to fight the dead that are coming south. And, you know, you had some of the wildlings ticked off about it. And guess what? Most of them died because, oh, snap, they didn't get on the boats. And then you had the other people, the brothers of the Night's Watch. They end up killing Jon Snow, basically.
Yeah.
So
Surprisingly, Tormund was one of the most moral characters.
yeah.
Like, even when he was rejected by Brienne, he just said,
He was the most
I'll
real.
go north, you know. I'm not going to, fight him over her or nothing, you know.
I wish
she
I
made her
had
choice.
I wish I had saved the meme, because it was like, we all want to laugh at Tormund, but when he got declined, he just shrugged his shoulders and went off and didn't call the girl a slut. And I was like, the girl was like, be like Tormund. But I would say, to your point, Jess, we don't need to find a leader. I think what you see in guys like Tormund or even Jon Snow, like they circumstances force them into leadership because they made the right choices. And I think if we can make the right choices, we become the leaders. Like, we don't have to find somebody, we don't have to delegate that or outsource that power to somebody else. We have the ability to step up and be those leaders.
Whoa, that's deep.
Thank you.
The power is within me the whole time.
Exactly, and you didn't even know it. So,
With great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, man, don't you put that on me, Spidey. Spidey's uncle.
so I would be remiss if I didn't thank our patrons. I apologize that I did it so late in the episode. I just started geeking out.
You going to the 500?
Of course I'm going to the Indy 500.
I can't wait to see you and the rest of the wall crew in the infield. I'm going to come visit you guys again.
Awesome. I work. We have media passes. So
Oh, cool.
Are you going out to the 500 too?
One day
I'll
you'll
be
have
there.
to get wall media passes, because I would love.
Is there a wall
that.
tent? Am I invited to that?
I swear, if
Get a
Jeremiah,
wall media pass.
if
Get
Jeremiah,
two of 'em.
if Jeremiah doesn't quit
3 of 'em.
asking me, Jeremiah Morrill asks me weekly, all year long, every week, 52 times a year.
Well, you should do it and then give it to me instead of him.
I go.
Oh.
They're not going to give a libertarian podcast media passes.
They
out to the
will
500.
if you sponsor a car. Bet.
Okay, well, our Patreon's doing well, but not that well.
If you'd like to support, throw $5 million our way.
Right. I
Buy
don't have
an
an
IndyCar sponsorship.
extra $150K laying around, and if I did, I probably wouldn't go to an IndyCar. But thank you to those who make that dream of a sponsorship, getting us closer and closer. Craig DaCosta, Christy Avery, the Libertarian Coalition, Jason Doolittle, and Ed Brehab, and Memerty Libs. Thank you guys so much, and we appreciate all of your patronage and for supporting us. And we have a team meeting tomorrow night at 7:30. We're going to talk about some new things that we've got going on. So
There's a new. By the way, there's
Yes, sir.
another Thrones episode next week.
What is it?
Yeah, the
It's
last
like
watch.
Yeah, it's like a documentary of the show.
Oh,
the
cool.
creation of it. So big fans will still watch. Same time, 9:00.
All right. All right. Thanks for joining us here on this episode of We Are Libertarians. Thank you to Todd. Thank you to Jessica. Thank you to Chris Gault. And thank you to you for listening. So
Thank
we
you,
appreciate
Chris
it.
Spangle.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to me because I don't get thanked a lot.
You never do.
Thanks,
No.
Spangle.
I need more thanks in my life. Thank you.
Sorry,
Jessica.
thanks, dear leader.
Thank you. All right. We'll see you later. Thanks, and we'll.